Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Green Cover Podcast, where we have really interesting conversations with some of the top farmers and experts in the regenerative ag world. Join us as we together learn how to better improve God's creation for future generations. You know, I'm sure you've all met people who are just out of the box thinkers, just really, really innovative. And my guest today, Mr. Abe Collins from Vermont, is just one of those guys. Abe is one of the people that we've known long before we started Green Cover. We met Abe back in our no-till days and just have always been impressed with his ability to think outside the confines of what is generally accepted. And so this is going to be a fascinating conversation. We're going to go a lot of different places, and I'm very excited to welcome you, Abe, to the Green Cover Podcast.
Great to be here, Keith. We've learned so much and enjoyed everything we've gotten from you all over the years.
Yes, and my wife Audrey and I, we still talk about that special trip when we came to Vermont. We visited your farm. You took us around. We saw some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. We saw that in person, and just what a great, wonderful trip that was. So, Abe, for our listeners who may not be familiar with you, go ahead and just briefly share your background. How have you gotten to where you're at now?
It's been a long ride as with everybody, but I started into agriculture working with Navajo grazers in Arizona, and the elder ladies who were the boss told us, hey, when we had big herds and we moved in big cycles across the land, this land was a sea of grass and flowers, and it's blowing desert today. And that really got me going down the road of they're right, and overlapping that with seeing what holistic managers were doing with taking degraded land and turning it back into healthy prairie was kind of a synthesis of those the very similar perspectives. I also was focused a lot on water harvesting, where water is the limiting factor, certainly, but also the enabling condition. We need all the water to soak in and be held and grow plants. So when I started dairy farming in Vermont, we came into a world of short grass rotational grazing, and we were one of the early all forage dairies. And going from short grass rotational grazing to needing to let the ecology express and feeding at least half of it back to the land, half of the biomass back to the land, really started to change things. And we started bringing in holistic management and keyline, which is both landscape design and using a subsoiler to incrementally loosen the packed soils that are just so common across farmed areas, to incrementally deepen soil. And as soon as 2005, we were amazed as farmers what we were finding with the roots and the soil, that on clay soils, the roots in the soil going deeper and deeper and deeper by the year, by many inches. And I guess I would call myself an applied amateur pedologist, meaning the study of soil formation. And this wasn't just hand waving and magic. We got to see, wow, this is actually soil physics and biology and chemistry all combining with this different grazing to deepen the soil and the water holding capacity and the rooting and the floral resource above the land. And we were definitely in the world of grazing the existing cool season perennial grasslands. So I wasn't a dairy farmer forever. When I stopped dairy farming, there were 1,100 dairies in Vermont. There are just over 400 today. And that was really only 15 years ago that I stopped dairy farming. And so that's been an alarming decline in the very people who can do this work of healing the soil. And we see it everywhere, the consolidation and decreasing family farms that are the bedrock of our small communities and have this latent capacity to heal land at scale. So we worked on feedback science a lot in that because we knew that we needed for the land to talk back to us in a way that was more than just looking at the surface. So 3D soil mapping and tracking energy and water and plant growth. And what also became clear in this time was knowledge generation, that people on the land, and this is me traveling around the country and the world, working with producers and learning so much. Like there's an Alexandrian library worth of knowledge almost on every farm.
Mm,
And as
yeah.
these farms went out of business, we're seeing the loss of that knowledge in effect. So that all kind of was proceeding. And then about 5 years ago, we formed the Landare Cooperative and we formed LandWeb, which is land, community, water, energy, biomass. And over the last 5 years, we've been building up these two organizations to heal our watershed homes and leave our kids deep topsoil watersheds with biodiversity and security and prosperity.
And I love that concept of how you form these entities and you're utilizing the community landscape to heal the broader problems. And I want to get to that, but I think let's build up to that just a little bit. I want to dive in and explore some of the components that you've used to get to that point. And so let's talk about your rip sower. Because you took an existing piece of equipment and you made it better. So let's talk about how you did that and the differences that you're seeing when your people, your group is running that rip sower through some of these fields.
The subsoiler, and it's funny, I often, get the critique of, well, that's tillage and tillage is bad, isn't it? And I guess I differ with that a little bit, is that we were thinking more along the lines of thinking the land as the land under our feet as like a beloved partner, friend, mother, and when my child or my mother is suffering, for example, from a lack of oxygen, I'm going to do something about it, right? And I don't want to wait 25 or 50 years for a
Yeah.
slow process. I want to intervene because that is critical. It's soil microbes and the plants are like you and me. We need to breathe. So in a way, we do need to go back to P.A. Yeomans in the 1940s and 1950s, discovering that this combination of addressing fertility and plant diversity and good grazing that addresses the needs of the plants and the soil, and physical decompaction with a subsoiler, that they were able to rapidly deepen rooting depth and soil depth. So we started with a simple subsoiler on clay ground. So there were rocks, but we knew where both of them were. Um, and clay, of course, has very high cation exchange capacity and nutrient holding, and is an amazing type of soil. But if it gets packed, things shut down. It's brick-like. So as we started loosening it, we said, well, this is great, and we get results, especially after like a wet year and then a wet spring, and then the summer drought would set in and we wouldn't have productivity. So we'd loosen it. We'd absolutely, the pastures would turn around with the next rain. Just, it would release the plants, whereas they had just been stunted and struggling from compaction and lack of oxygen. Um, but we also said, well, we know that we have very low diversity. We went from a monoculture, for example, of corn to a duoculture of grass and legumes. But the research well on this, and of course, teachers like Christine Jones have been
Yeah.
instrumental in bringing us up and looking at the research at the Yana experimental stations. So we knew we needed to introduce more plants. So why don't we just sow into the furrows as we subsoil? And then it was only one more step to we want to put liquid biostimulants but that include minerals and microbiology and stuff like fish and seaweed and milk. Of course, milk was abundantly available to us, and the work of Terry Gompert had pointed us in the direction of using that. So, liquid, seed, and this physical decompaction in the context of addressing the mineral deficiencies on the ground, which are pronounced here in Vermont and in many places, especially with a century or 75 years of ignoring micronutrients and soil biology and just brute strength and ignorance with NPK. We didn't have to pay attention to enzymes and the fact that micronutrients are catalytic or the cofactors or the central atoms and all of these enzymes that make everything happen. So putting all those three things together basically went through remarkable results on the ground where we farms were doing it and doing everything together all at once. And that was always a challenge because people wanted to study us, right? Well, these are outlandish claims of deepening soil. We know that it takes 1,000 years to build an inch of soil. You know that refrain. But only looking at one thing at a time doesn't do the job. Just like caring for a beloved family member, you don't just do one thing, you do everything that they need.
Yep.
So over the years, go ahead.
You change the system.
We are changing the whole system state and all at once. And, thinking simplistically, like in terms of Liebig's law of the minimum in the barrel with the low staves, the instant you address your potassium deficiency or something, hey, your microbiology and your rooting depth and your plant diversity and your insect health, it's immediately the next problem, the next shortcoming. But we thought about it in terms of enabling conditions rather than limiting factors. And this was enabling conditions to care for the whole system. So we kept building iteration after iteration of these. And the early rip sowers were truly made from junkyard parts, right? We were just kept bolting stuff on. I mean, the pictures of those old machines are pretty hilarious. But as we got more and more trials, and we have very rocky soils often in Vermont, so we needed a way to not pull up every rock. And we didn't want to do the machine work, but it just changed everything so fast that it was like, we're going to keep working with this. So at first we moved to hydraulic jumpers, where the shank would jump over the rocks. But then we found a beautiful platform that had swivels and hydraulic jumpers. And that allowed us to it's like a physics machine, just ducking and weaving around every rock.
So it actually goes around the rock?
Yeah.
Oh, that's sweet.
And it does it at the same time. It goes around and jumps, whatever it takes, because all it's doing is finding the path of least resistance. So coupled with that, and then always with the seeder and the liquid applicator, we just kept developing that. At this point, we jumped entirely to that platform of the swiveling hydraulic shanks and had this incredible manufacturing partner in Jonas Shirk, a fellow out of Pennsylvania, manufacturer out of Pennsylvania. And we just kept developing and iterating so that everything was ground driven for the seeding and the liquid rate, and the hydraulic top link and hand crank shanks for easy adjustment. So and towability between farms, because a lot of us are sharing these implements. Mm-hmm. So we kept going, and it kept getting better and better. And of course, establishing seed into existing very aggressive cool season perennial sod is always a challenge. So I've spent more time than I care to admit, studying strip till and sweeps and building iterations, and we test them with our farms. And we think we have a beautiful, functional, affordable machine to get done. It isn't just a 10x improvement in efficiency and not picking rocks. It makes it possible because farmers barely have any time. Mm-hmm. And to do something in an hour that would take 2 days, that just changes whether or not it will happen. But it goes further to all of the experiments we've done, and there's been so much trial and error, and effectively by a farmer R&D team, right? These are us farms using these ones we've built and learning every step of the way, to the point that, we can hook up and make a plan, address mineral deficiencies, because they're so pronounced usually. And we need the strong plant growth to stuff the newly loosened soil with roots and exudates and microbes. So we address the mineral deficiencies, and we custom tailor these seed mixes to the current successional level of the land. And green cover has been beyond invaluable in all this, because you've supplied us with the cover crops, the annual cover crops, and the forbs and the native plants, because we want more and more and more native plants. So we do all that, and then we go through a sequence. It's not a one-off. Yeomans figured this out 75 years ago, and we've kept on with it, that we incrementally loosen that soil. Usually we start at 10 inches. We're busting a pan we're reconnecting the subsoil and the topsoil. The water all falls in, especially when it's on, not on contour, but on keyline patterns, which drift water toward the ridges. Um, and that, there was research in Texas in 2011 that showed that contour ripping just alone, without any of the other work that we do, cut runoff 50% instantly. So that's half the water that used to run off is now soaking in. That's a big change. And then we're also sailing through drought because our roots and our soil water holding capacity is so quickly changed. And then just each time we do it, going 3-4 inches deeper, and the roots plunge down and keep going. Like the benefit extends past the depth that we've ripped to. So it's been a real journey, but that's been we feel really like it's in service to our farms, but our larger community of increasing the infiltration and the floral resources and the soil health.
Yeah, I love how you're combining so many things. The improved infiltration, the loosening of the soil, but then, like you said, filling that slot with roots and filling it with biology. You're doing it all at the same time. So, talk just real briefly. If people are interested in learning more about the rip sower, where can they go to get that information? Then I want you to talk a little bit, because you referenced the drought. I know you guys just went through a historic drought there in the Northeast. Talk about how those fields that had this technology and this biology applied fared.
People can go to the Landare Cooperative website, which is a simple affair. We've been very inwardly focused, but you can fill out a little form, and there's a link to the rip sower, and we'll get in touch with us, and we'll gladly serve you. We want these machines in operation everywhere. The drought follows flood. And it was Hugh Hammond Bennett who said, boy, on the order of 75 years ago, that flood control begins where the raindrop falls. And we need that water to soak in, but then additionally, we need it to not create saturated conditions, but rather we need plant available water. And the field capacity minus permanent wilting point, at which the water is too tightly bound, is where the plant available water content. And the remarkable thing, there's some simple soil physics aspects of that if your depth of horizon soil is 6 or 8 inches, you have a very limited amount of water storage in there. But if you double or triple that, roughly speaking, you double or triple your water holding capacity. And what's amazing about Forbes in general is that taproot. A fellow named Skinner did research, on the order of 20-25 years ago in Pennsylvania, and he found that by including over 30% chicory, they eliminated drought effects. And it's because the chicory in effect shares water with the rest of the shallow rooted plant community. We don't want to think as simply as just chicory. We think about all the deep rooted species sharing, but how that's translated on the farms that have done the work of increasing the rooting depth and adding the deep rooted forbs and prairie plants is that they, relative to the norm, they sailed through the drought. And yeah, things slowed down for everybody when you have a historic drought like never before in recorded history. But it's the deep roots and the increased water holding capacity and the increased soil horizon depth and rooting depth, and the whole system working together and sharing water through hydraulic lift and mycorrhizal fungi. It's such an intelligent, beautiful system. But we're taking care of the system instead of just looking at one thing at a time. So yes, the farms that have done the work with the rip sowing process and the deep-rooted species, relatively speaking, sailed through this terrible drought year.
That's really encouraging, because really what you're addressing is drought mitigation, but with your increased infiltration, the better water holding capacity, you're doing a lot of flood mitigation as well. And flooding has been a big issue there also for you guys. And that has kind of led into some of the other things that you developed and you mentioned, with that, the watershed contractors thinking of, these farmers and dairymen as watershed contractors and how that affects the larger community. And I think that's one of the more unique things that you and your group have done is looking at that, on a bigger scale. Here in Nebraska, I mean, we have more irrigated acres than anybody else. And so, we don't have local conservation districts. It's all been arranged around watersheds and not counties, which is just kind of a cool concept. Doesn't mean we solve all the problems, but at least we're trying to solve the problems along a watershed and not along, just some arbitrary county boundary. Talk a little bit about this concept that you are promoting, that farmers are watershed contractors, and how that leads to the bigger picture.
Thanks for the opportunity. I think it's a really simple but powerful idea that we're building up to, and we plan to be operating at scale as watershed contractors. In a lot of ways, this came from what my dad taught me. My dad was a carpenter and a contractor, and I paid a lot of bills over the year doing the same thing, right? Learn carpentry from the old man, and he taught me, building a house is complicated, and there's always the project changes, and the customer wants more and more and everything. He's like, I've just learned to do everything at cost plus. And that's all of the costs of our labor, our materials, and subcontractors, plus a stable margin. And that was, he didn't get rich doing it, that's for sure. But he delivered value to his customers, and everybody got to see under the hood every step of the way. And I really admired that about him. And I saw friends of mine who did fixed bids, and they made tons of money because they bid real high, right? But in a way, the chapter that we're heading into, where our communities need water storage, they need massive floral diversity to support the insects that support us, right? They need water holding capacity, they need reduced flooding and reduced drought and reduced wildfire. We could go on. We need that as a society, and the people who can deliver it manage land at scale. And we haven't seen a lot of success with, we're going to subsidize and regulate and do technical assistance and tell these farmers what practices to use, which should work out according to our statistical models of BMPs. So the concept of watershed contracting is working at a transparent cost of production plus a stable margin, which is another thing that we farmers have not enjoyed in serving our communities to heal whole watersheds. And the watershed is the logical unit of analysis. From the top of all the ridges and the water, soaking in the water, like Hugh Hammond Bennett said, every step of the way, and holding it and purifying it and cleaning it. So watershed contracting is where we're working to at scale of farmers organized, not just one by one, but as cooperative companies where the farmers own the company that heals the whole watershed. And as grazers, it feels like a superpower sometimes to manage a herd of 50 or 100 or 1,000 cattle and to be able to affect tens and hundreds and thousands of acres. And that same thing goes. We farmers know how to go out and plant a crop on 1,000 acres. And most people just don't work or think or have access to the equipment, right? And to do that at scale. So watershed contracting is where we're headed. And what we're seeing is that it's very challenging to rapidly heal land at scale and with the speed that our communities need, and to pay for it with milk and meat. So when we expand our thinking to the scale from the field to the farm out to the watershed, all of a sudden it becomes highly logical to harness that very old equation of 1 to 16, that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So that's a rigorous quantitative equation, isn't it? It's got something to it, though.
I never thought about it that way, but yeah, I like that.
But let's soak in the water and deepen the rooting depth and the floral diversity and all of that, the biodiversity, to stop the problems before they happen. And speaking to your flood thing, there was something big that happened in 2011 here. And most communities these days are experiencing flood, drought, and fire. But in 2011, Tropical Storm Irene devastated Vermont. and something like $1 billion worth of damage. But in my hometown of Rochester, where I grew up, a steep mountain valley, 100,000 acre headwaters to an entire river system called the White River that flows down into the Connecticut River that flows into the Long Island Sound eventually. Um, we had between 8 and 11 inches of rain in a day. And that just, it destroyed our infrastructure, businesses. There was no getting in or out of the valley for 11 days. All the bridges were gone. And the community is still recovering. Here in Vermont in the last 3 years, every year on July 10th, we've had catastrophic flooding. It's beginning to feel like a bad joke. Catastrophic flooding that's devastating communities. And we just cannot afford that. And our thinking goes beyond just farm fields. We're thinking at the level of forested watersheds and steep mountain slopes, the whole system, and how to address it every step of the way. And it includes part of our watershed contracting, includes contour compliant infrastructure. People in the Midwest, people in Nebraska know how much money went in to contour terracing by the USDA. Billions and billions of dollars. Strangely, that knowledge never made it to the northeastern United States. We have almost zero contour compliant infrastructure. So the deeper soil, massive amounts of litter, because litter, of course, dramatically changes infiltration, evaporation, infiltration, and all that, and soil health. But contour compliant infrastructure, which comes strongly from the Keyline landscape design system, is a part of watershed contracting. As we build the infrastructure we're going to leave our kids, it's going to conform with the land, or it will continue to concentrate water, and the roads and the bridges and the culverts will not only get blown out, but they're part of the problem of contributing to the flooding. So watershed contracting is about organizing ourselves to heal whole watersheds, soak in and hold the water, recharge the groundwater, purify the water from toxics that we've dumped onto the land for over a century, and to do this work in service to our community. And it is a new economics that isn't based so much on, we periodically just have to bail out this critical industry, which is agriculture, right? Agriculture has always been different from every other industry, but this boom and bust, bubble cycles, et cetera, commodity, everything being controlled by commodity pricing that's outside of our hands. Rather, we're working in service to our communities at a transparent cost of production for whatever it costs, not a fixed per acre practice rate or something like that, whatever it costs to heal the land.
So I love that concept. It's big, it's bold, it feels fresh. Have you had good buy-in from the farmers and the dairymen and even, I don't know, whoever's managing those forested areas? So let's talk about that first. Have you had good buy-in from the producer?
Yeah, and I was it Wayne Gretzky who said skate to where the puck's going to be. In a way, we're thinking this, and this comes from holistic management of not attacking problems. Rather, we're managing for a land, people, economics whole, and always thinking about what world do we want to leave our kids. So we've started there and worked backwards. And in terms, our farmer cooperative is very small, and we've kept it small as we've built capacity, because we can't expand out to thousands of farms at all at our current capacity. But we've been working to build scalable systems. Yeah, we're bought in. The notion is so outside the norm of farmers grow meat, milk, produce, grain, and you pay them for that. It is very far outside of that. So it's aspirational, I guess I would say, and we're building scalable systems to be able to do it. But our pilots, where we with our farms and with other farms in our satellite farms within our realm, yeah, the notion makes sense. And maybe we should skip it for the moment, but everybody says, yeah, but that's a fortune. That's going to cost a fortune to heal the land. That's if you ignore the ounce of prevention, in the pound of cure. And so if you're going to ask where the money's going to come from, you really need to ask, where does money come from? And if we as a society choose to hire farmers to do this critical work of caring for the land, we can get to that eventually. We should have that conversation in depth another time. Um, but we have good buy-in from our cooperating farms, and what we've done is introduce an idea that tickles the imagination and requires more conversation, and it requires pilot projects. Pilot projects are where the rubber meets the road, and not just sitting around in ivory towers and gesticulating and pontificating in perpetuity. Rather, we do the work on the land to see what does this cost, how fast can we get the results. And in my hometown of Rochester, in this valley, that's one of our most important pilot projects to me, because that community is sitting waiting at the mercy of the next big rainstorm. And certainly this summer, and I've been told over the years, we don't have drought in Vermont by so-called leading experts. I'm like, we do every summer. In fact, we have dry periods that absolutely challenge growth. But this summer put to bed the notion that we don't have drought in Vermont. We do. So we have good buy-in, and it's in effect building and growing an idea and fleshing it out in practice with pilot projects.
Yeah, I really like that concept. I heard a podcast Bobby Kennedy was on, and he was talking about all the hidden cost within systems, and if we could really associate those costs, and a lot of these costs are picked up by society, flooding, drought, all of these different things, sedimentation. If those costs would actually be assigned to the practices upstream that are causing them, then you could have a clear economic picture of what the right way to go would be. But so much of that is just being masked because of of the subsidies, if you will, that society is doing. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, is looking at assigning those costs, moving them literally upstream, if you will, and trying to address the problem there before it happens. So how has the communities latched onto this? How are they buying in, and are they willing to do the funding, the cost plus program that you're talking about?
I don't want to overstate that. We're 50 miles down the road and everything's going along and it's all happening. We've been building this point by point, and we've had to do the science and the land management and the organizing. But an exciting development for us this spring, Vermont has a tradition of town meetings, which is direct democracy. And that means the whole town gets together and in the high school auditorium or gymnasium, and considers the factors facing us. And this spring at town meeting in Rochester, Vermont, we had a unanimous vote of support, which was meant so much to us, in support of this White River Headwaters pilot program to do the work of infiltrating the water and healing the watershed, in effect. So we had a unanimous vote of support for that, and that was a pretty incredible prelude to what we hope are hundreds of towns doing this work. And funding has always been difficult and challenging, no question. For one thing, the work of healing degraded land ain't cheap. I mean, the mineral costs, the planning, the biostimulants, the seed costs. You alone know the seed costs. I mean, we're moving toward establishing truly prairie, like very super diverse, high biodiversity, native plants, and focused heavily on forbs. That's
But very productive.
Incredibly productive, as we've seen some remarkable instances of through our friend Russ Wilson recently. But that's hundreds of dollars per acre just for that seed, and you have to take it from where it is to where it's going to be. So the cost of management and the cost of science in the beginning and the cost of infrastructure development, I mean, in the end, not in the end, but it's pretty easy to, and we've done spreadsheeting on this, to look at costs on the order of $5,000 per acre to transform ground from where it is to deep-rooted prairie with 6 and 10 and 16-foot deep root systems and A horizon soils that are 2, 3, and 5 times deeper than they are today. So there's real challenges with that, but pilot projects with funding starting on the farm with in the watershed context is the right way to approach it for us.
I love that, and I love. I mean, you look at society today. Nothing gets past you. People can't agree on anything, and to have an entire community be 100% unanimous in favor of something speaks to the power of what you're doing. And I've always thought that regenerative ag is the one place where everybody can come to the table and go away with a win. There doesn't have to be a loser. You know, the consumer, the producer, the environment, society, climate, it can all come away from the regenerative ag table with a win. And I think that's what you're demonstrating is that people are kind of starting to recognize that, and that's super encouraging.
It it is. We're not having a war on anything. We're cooperating for the benefit of today and the future generations. I mean, I think we can all agree we want to leave our kids prosperity and health and and freedom from fear and secure environmental security is not some abstraction or something divisive. We need the water to soak in and the land to produce through flood and drought and fire and plague for that matter. And it all comes down to biodiversity and soil health are the engines that sustain us. So working toward that rather than against any, as soon as we declare a war on something, it's things get divisive. Whereas if we're agreeing, no, we're going to leave our kids deep topsoil watersheds with security and prosperity, uh, it's hard to not get behind that.
Yeah, I love that. And so then all this kind of led to the formation of the Landare Cooperative, I assume, and maybe just talk just a little bit about how that's structured, how that's organized, and you know what exact services the cooperative provides to its members.
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity. So it that was actually about 2 years of pretty intensive looking into corporate structures that could serve the vision. And for farmers, cooperatives are not something mysterious. We've known for quite some time that we organize, to give ourselves to create power, we have to band together and pool our resources. And we created this cooperative to do that, and that means that we own the business. We the farmers own the business. We actually created, and this has all been enabled really in the last 10 to 15 years. There's new cooperative forms that enable investment and that enable multiple member classes. So we've created the legal structure to not only be comprised, the business isn't only made up of farms, but we have membership classes for businesses, non-farming community members, governments can actually be part owners of this. So there's six member classes, and eventually we'll all be able to own this business, which is watershed contracting and serving us, the entire community. That's been important to us. That legal structure is different than we think of today, where some outfit, whether noble minded or not, owns a company that comes in and does a job. We own the company that's doing the job to ourselves.
Yeah.
Along the way, there's been some real practical components that we've discovered through doing that we need. Landcare Tools is one wholly owned subsidiary of the cooperative, and that's manufacturing and providing rip sowers, seed, mineral, and biostimulants, various ferments and biostimulants, largely made from milk at this point in our trajectory. And then there's Landcare Prairie, which is a custom hire company that shows up and takes land, however it is now, and goes through the sequence, which includes tillage and fertilizing and a sequence of cover crops and detoxification, because we often have bad chemicals in the soil. And it just so happens the lactic acid bacteria, whey, made from milk, is such a powerful base ingredient for detoxing, whether it's glyphosate, neonics, persistent forever chemicals. We could keep going. And also stopping bird flu, like lactic acid bacteria are very powerful for that as well. So land care prairie is about the custom hire to get the work done because we need this to operate with speed. And then there's a knowledge production system, which is bottom up grassroots knowledge production with the scientific landscape feedback and the work we do on the ground, coupling into a new way of producing knowledge. The old way is all around us, and that's experts in universities have questions and do research, and that knowledge that they, discoveries that they make are disseminated through extension as best management practices. Whereas we're saying, no, every farm is a research farm with real time, rigorous landscape feedback, and we're the research farm altogether. So knowledge production and the software that'll go along with that are another part of it. And then Bloom Train is a giant piece of what we're doing. And Bloom Train is sequencing is sequencing blooms every day of the season from April 15th to December 1st to care for the pollinators. So Bloom Train is a really important part of this because we all need to, this is an all hands on deck thing. We've lost, an estimated 95% of insect biomass on Earth in the last century. And in the last 30 years, 70%. Anybody with basic ecological literacy knows that you take out the insects that are just above the plants in the food web, and we're all in trouble. So caring for pollinators and rapidly reversing that extinction trajectory is really important to us. So these are all examples, and watershed pilots are how we kind of bring them together. That we've done it's 5 and 10 acre size pilots because that's what we've been able to afford and muster, but keep scaling that. Eventually we get to watershed contracting and the land care digital platform, which is software to help us manage and heal our farms and watersheds.
You just said so much there that I have so many areas I would love to dig into there, and I have to restrain myself from digging into the lactobacillus area. We may have to just schedule a whole other podcast next year on that because that is fascinating. But I do want to dive in just a little bit more because I know that you and your team have developed some of the best. You talked about the software platforms, but also the monitoring systems and the monitoring pieces. So this isn't just hey, we're going to go out and run a rip sower and then we'll go out and take some pictures and say, yeah, this looks better. Right. You guys are doing some really sophisticated monitoring and then uploading that to your digital platforms. So you're using the old technology of the yeoman's plow and you're coupling it with cutting edge digital technology to really bring together the best of all these worlds. Talk a little bit about the monitoring piece and how that's being uploaded to your decision-making tools.
So landscape feedback for us is a central idea. And in a way, complexity science is the state of art of science today. And these are complex emergent systems that are self-organizing, which is every thing from the cell to an economy, to a family, to ecology in general, as opposed to the old reductionism of we get to take apart nature down into the smallest parts and then we understand those and then we understand the whole. Landscape feedback within any complex system, if you don't have feedback, the system doesn't work. The system, all the parts of the system, and that's the nature of complex systems, lots of parts, whether it's people or microorganisms and roots and flowers and all that. So without feedback, complex systems don't work. We know that scientifically, but our current natural resource science is not based on feedback. It's based on statistical predictions of the environmental outcomes of practices. And those environmental outcomes include yield. So if you do practice X, you should get flooding outcome Y. But that doesn't work. That doesn't actually work to tell us. And for me, it began very simply with, as we were trying to learn how to do all forage dairy while we grew topsoil and took care of insects in the early days of Bloom Train and all forage dairy, I had a really remarkable feedback system at hand that I feel lucky, and maybe, there's not many of us who have had this opportunity, that I would do all this studying and say, we're going to change the grazing up in this way. We're going to let plants grow to maximum vegetative state and only leave 30 or only take 30 or 40%. And we're going to be moving the animals at that point 5 to 10 times a day. I remember Neil Dennis was a real friend, and I got a call out of the blue from Saskatchewan. Hey, I hear you're moving your cows 10 times a day. It was Neil. And I was doing it with 100 cows and he was doing it with 1,000. But boy, the learning that came from that. And the feedback loop that I had was I'd take my study and I'd go out and I'd change up the grazing. And then I'd milk the cows. And I had a bulk tank with a dipstick. And that dipstick would show the milk response through the animals, through the plants, tying back to my consciousness in this feedback loop that only had a delay of 2 or 3 days. Like how we changed up the grazing would show up in the bulk tank. We also had a penetrometer, which is a simple but powerful tool for us farmers. And when all of us were just standing in some pasture walk in a field saying, this is green and lovely, looks good, keep it up. Whereas I quickly learned, wow, I have, my pan is at 4 or 5 inches and it looks good on Tuesday, but it doesn't rain for 10 days and it doesn't look so good, right? So with these feedbacks of that beautiful soil, forage, cow, milk production back to me and my understanding, I quickly gained a sense I need better feedback than we're able to just get just standing on the land looking. Important as that is, we need more. So I started actually with 3D soil mapping, which has been a whole 18, 20-year journey of my life because all the soil monitoring is 6 inches deep, which came from that relationship between a 6-inch soil core or a bunch of them aggregated, composited, and fertilizer application and yield response. That's just a simplistic old way of doing it, but it still predominates. So 3D soil mapping, so that I could understand the full system as we managed it for deeper and deeper, we're already going below the depth of monitoring at the starting point, but we're going for 4 feet of topsoil, not 4 inches. And then it grew to, well, that isn't enough even. That's powerful, and it was powerful, but we need more. We need to know energy, water, plant growth, soil, and the nutrient cycles. In a way, this was an expansion too from the holistic management fundamentals of the 4 ecosystem processes, and everything you do is in a tight feedback loop with plan, control, monitor, replan. So we started growing from that point, which, having embraced that in the 90s, I said, no, we need the next steps. So we connected with the field, with the leaders of the field called the scientific field called environmental biophysics. And environmental biophysics rigorously quantifies energy and matter exchanges and transfers and transformations and flows in the whole soil, plant, animal, atmosphere continuum. So this is from high up in the atmosphere to the water table, what's happening to all the energy, water, and minerals. So having all of this measurement means we're working with satellite remote sensing, with 3D soil mapping, with all these measurements on the ground of solar radiation, biomass, saturated hydraulic conductivity, which ties to infiltration, and putting that all together and building a scalable system that feeds back to the farmers on a daily basis relative to their management. And the apps that we've been building, we're doing a big training push this winter with our farms. For every management action and observation that they make, tying into this quantification of the Earth system, so that it becomes, in effect, a seamless learning and feedback system. And that's a pretty broad overview, but I would say that probably 60% of my life is the science portion of it, and working with this incredible team of environmental biophysicists, people like John Norman and Christine Malling and ex-NASA engineers and all these people doing this work, that their contribution and the marriage of, in effect, regenerative agriculture with environmental biophysics, we believe is setting the stage for a new chapter in learning systems and in natural resources science, where we're not just saying some experts said we should do this practice, but we farmers are continuously adjusting our management on a daily basis to optimize the healing process of the land. So this is landscape feedback to land stewards in our communities to heal our watershed homes.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I love how you're bringing those two things together, because sometimes people look out at the land and they just go, well, those guys are they're just farmers, and there's not that much going on there. I love one of the first podcasts that we did was with Dr. Laura Kavanaugh. She's with AEA now, but she was a rocket scientist. She worked on the space shuttle. She was a geneticist, and now she's a soil scientist. And she says, "Oh yeah, the soil is way more complicated than those other things." And so, I just love that. How there's so much going on there that we can't see, but by getting the feedback, we can see the outcomes, the actual outcomes, not modeling, which I've always had a problem with that too. The actual outcomes, and with the proper measuring and sensing and feedback devices, we can tie it to, I did this and here's what happened. Now, to try to figure out all the mechanisms of why it happened, there's a lot there yet. So there's a lot of undiscovered territory and frontier there for us to continue to study. So I think that's absolutely fascinating. And I love how you've been able to put together this team of all these people. And you mentioned the apps and talked about the apps. And I was just looking at some of the materials that you guys have. Those aren't just somebody did it in their basement type app. These are very sophisticated, high end, high level apps. Are those available to other people, or you're still just trialing them within your pilot programs as of right now?
We're building within, and I think one of the foundations, and it goes to landscape feedback to the stewards to change our management day by day, is that everything that we've done, we learn by doing. And we have to, and it takes, this is complex stuff. And it isn't like some simple thing of you push the button and the cab comes, right? It just isn't that. So we have to do a lot of in-house R&D, and that's with the farmers doing the research and development and testing. And probably this goes to two things. One, the intuition and knowledge of farmers. I find myself at a loss sometimes to communicate how sophisticated it is to non-farmers. Someone once said non-farming muggles, in Harry Potter speak, I guess. It's incredible what farmers know and how tuned in they are to their land, especially for me, the grazers, because the grazers, you don't get to brute strength your way through everything. You're subject to the laws of nature. um, so testing everything with our own ranks and not releasing it. We don't believe in moving fast and breaking things. We need to responsibly develop everything before we release it to the larger community. So the second we have this available, everybody will know. But yeah, it's been a long, slow process, and we're okay with that because we want to get it right.
Are you also starting to tie these practices, these land outcomes? Are you also looking at the nutrient density of the milk, of the meat, of the produce? How are you tying that into all the other things that you're doing?
Thank you for mentioning it because I'm guilty of forgetting to mention how fundamental that is to the whole thing. And
Because that's the ultimate outcome, right?
it's human health is is water and environmental security and food nutrient density and all of the plant chemicals that come along with the nutrient density, right? So yeah, this is all about healthy food, absolutely. And the connection between healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy livestock, and healthy people. This is well known and well treated by Albrecht and other innovators in this world that you and I live in. But one small example of that is not jumping from healthy soil straight to perfect meat and milk and produce, but rather understanding that we do all the work of plant diversity and deep roots and soil structure and microbial communities to the prairie plants, and the animals eat those, and then eventually the people get the benefit from eating that food. When we look at the nutrient, we do forage analysis, for example, of the forbs that we plant, or that the prairie plants that our colleague Russ Wilson has been stewarding. And the nutrient density in the forbs, stuff like chicory and plantain, generally speaking, is 50 to 100% higher just in mineral content than the grass legume systems, the shallow rooted grass legume systems that we're so accustomed to. So yes, we've been earning our way up, and it's very exciting because the last 4 years we've been working very hard on a tool that measures daily biomass production in every field and forecasts it out about a week to 10 days relative to our management. But it's not the old just use the NDVI and find a correlation between the satellite picture and the some biomass cuttings that were done. This is actually a lot of modeling. There's models running the system between the satellite observations and the farmer's observations going in to really, and all the plant community types and everything, to really track that biomass production on a paddock by paddock basis. And we're beginning the work of marrying the nutrient density of the forages coupled with the biomass production so that we're actually tracking the quantity of minerals per acre per day that are in the plants that are growing up. So we're actually quantitatively tracking mineral cycling. And that mineral cycling goes all the way to the food nutrient density that ultimately is going to create the healthy human beings who, that's what we want for our kids.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great, Abe, to live in a world where we stop talking about yield in bushels or pounds and start talking about yield in nutrients per acre?
I'm right with you, and what we're seeing, of course, is very high carbohydrate grains, for example, with very low nutrient density,
Yeah.
and it's the shallow rooted, it's the crop species that have continually been bred for yield, and it's the nutrient deficiencies that are actually in the soil. But one amazing thing, and this I think goes to the fact that this is part of a global prairie movement. People around the world managing for the massive plant diversity and deep rooted systems that created the deep soils that today feed the world, like where you live, right? These amazing, profound soils that developed under prairie. It is that what we've discovered using the very useful total nutrient digestion test offered by the Regen Ag Labs and Lance Gunderson's work, by using those and taking 4-foot cores, which we don't take 6-inch cores, we take 4-foot cores, and we use all these other instruments that are measuring the soils very deep, 4, 6, 10 feet deep. But what we found when we compare a traditional Malic 3 compared to a total nutrient digestion is massive quantities, as anyone who's done it has found, massive quantities of minerals in the soils and in the subsoils, but they're largely locked up and not accessed by roots. Once we get this prairie level of rooting depth and diversity and start structuring that soil where those minerals become available, there are enormous amounts of minerals available to produce the healthy food that we need in the soils and to not be forever married to high fertilizer inputs. But we have to earn our way there because it's acids and enzymes produced by plants and microbes and other soil animals that give us access to those tens of thousands of pounds of minerals per acre.
Yeah, I that reminds me. So Tom Robinson from Australia was over here a couple of years ago, and I always will remember what he said. You have to earn the right to reduce your inputs, and he
Yes.
said you can't just go out there and start cutting things out without building the system to replace them. That's earning that right. And we all want to reduce our inputs, but we have to start by building the system. And I think that's what you're doing. And And I want to just make sure that people understand that what you're doing it in Vermont. And people may think, well, Vermont, that's a little state. It's clear up there in the Northeast. They have this, this climate. And so that's great, Abe, what you're doing. But, that's not really applicable out here to us in Nebraska. But we know that it is. And I just want to encourage people to not discount these concepts and principles. So one of the early podcasts that we did earlier this year was with Kip Heinrichs. He's right here in Nebraska. He's farming, beautiful, deep central Nebraska irrigated ground, and he's converted it all over to natives. He's
Mm,
converted it all over. So he no longer owns a combine. It's all going through cows.
mm.
And it's, he's still doing some annual cover crops, forage crops, but he's converting to eastern gamma grass and, the big blue stem and ending grass and switch and then the forbs and legumes. Kind of what you're doing, but he's doing it here where, he could grow 280 bushel corn. But he's finding that it's more profitable to run all that through an animal because of all of these things that you just talked about. So these principles that you're talking about are applicable all across the country, all across our foodscapes. And it's super exciting to me to know that people like you are working on and developing the systems and the software and even the legal structures. I love that concept too, that at some point we'll be able to export that knowledge to other areas. So, kind of as we bring this to a close, maybe what would just be an encouragement that you would give people that are thinking about starting down this path of utilizing farmers as watershed contractors and looking at this whole concept?
That is a good big question. I think your point about earning the reduced inputs is a really important point. And how do we earn that? It's not through, an hourly wage. We earn it through care for the whole system. The ability to access the almost infinite power of nature to sustain us and care and provide for us all comes from caring from the whole system. And that care is love for the land and for community. So that is, I've never not encountered that in any community I've ever been in. And so harnessing that power of love for and service to community is the starting point, and it's ubiquitous. I've never not found it. So I think we are incredibly well equipped to start from that point and then believe in the farmers, believe in our intelligence and our capacity to manage whole systems, not one part at a time. And it takes knowledge and information that is not necessarily widespread, but in my work, Keith, my experience with you bringing me into your community has been encountering people from around the world who are just doing such incredible work. So we have to be open to the learning and doing something new. And the thing that I found in common from everybody, from Christine Jones to Dale Strickler to you guys to heroes of mine, like these Navajo grandmothers and like Neil Dennis, is its absolute care for the land and willingness to innovate and work with others to heal the commons, which is the total functional health of the earth system, of Mother Nature. So starting with that kind of attitude of love and care for community and willingness to innovate and experiment, and then to do the pilot projects in reality, right? To like, we're not just going to talk about this. We're going to start on 5 or 50 acres and we're going to put everything we have into healing this ground. And if we could do it on 50 acres, we can do it on 5,000. It's then it becomes a matter of scaling, which is not just multiplication. There's a lot more to it because as each time we grow in scale with something, it brings in more and more people and more aspects of the whole landscape. So love and care, commitment to the future generations and leaving our kids working watershed, innovation, piloting the work on the ground and having the land talk back to us, both through our own observations and sense of smell, but also scientifically. So it's a feedback system so that we can every day be adjusting to refine, because this is some nuanced stuff. That's why, your relative who's in the hospital all hooked up to every machine, those machines are reading every aspect of their bodily function. And we need that level to be able to really, in a nuanced, refined way, care for our loved ones. So I'm very hopeful about the future because I think we have all the raw ingredients in effect: an incredible earth system, communities, care for the future, and the knowledge that's been generated by people working together in this regenerative agriculture movement.
I think that's a great answer, Abe. And I think what you just did was really describe the difference between soil health, which is important, and regenerative ag, because regenerative ag includes soil health, but it's also regenerating people and the relationships and the
Yeah.
community, which is what you're doing, you and your team there at the Landare Cooperative and everything you're doing. So thank you, Abe, for all that you're doing for regenerating God's creation for future generations. That's our mission here at Green Cover, and we're just so glad that we've got great people like you that we can do that with. So thank you, everyone, for joining this episode of the Green Cover podcast. Go out and regenerate your part of God's creation today.
Thank you, Keith.
My brother and I started Green Cover in 2009 because we understand what it's like to be a farmer starting out on the journey to improve soil health. We saw the power of plant and biological diversity on our own farm here in Nebraska, but we found that it was difficult to get the right cover crop seed mix. We also learned that there was a big learning curve in successfully implementing cover crops. That's why we build Green Cover, so that farmers like you can access the highest quality cover crop seed put into the right diverse mixes, along with the technical advice and the educational resources to help you successfully implement cover crops on your own operation. So contact us today and we'll help you with the right cover crop mix for your farm or ranch so you can regenerate your portion of God's creation for future generations.